Welcome. Thanks for joining us for another session of the Elliott School Salon Series. My name is Allison Croney Moses. I'm the Associate Director at the Elliott School of Fine and Applied Arts. At the Elliott School, we don't have an official land acknowledgement. We are in a careful learning process of our history and recognize that we stand on land of Indigenous people. The Elliott School Salon Series is generously supported by Haystack Mountain School of Crafts. Thank you for joining today's conversation called Care of Repair, Repair of Care, Repair's Role in Craft and Community. So we're going to kick off with a question to you all. What role does repair play in your life and home? So as we work towards fulfilling our mission to inspire lifelong learning in craft and creativity for all, we're charged to consider what for all truly means. So as a result, over the years, the Elliott School has thought critically about the role craft and arts plays, or arts education plays in our society, and the role that the Elliott School plays in the sector of craft and arts education. So thank you to all in this room, this Zoom room, who've joined us as we've discussed and thought and challenged ourselves as we grappled with racial equity in craft and design. We even talked about identity and representation, talking to kids about race through arts, and much more. Tonight's conversation, I'm like looking at the chat while I'm looking at my notes, and I'm like, ooh, what are they saying? So tonight's conversation evolved from a relationship with Namita Gupta-Wiggers, an artist, curator, educator, writer, and the founding director of the Masters in Critical Craft Studies program at Warren Wilson College. And Namita may be in the audience tonight. Through learning and discussion sessions with that Namita facilitated with students and alumni of the program, as well as with the staff and leaders of craft organizations, I was able to hear from Amy Meissner about her thoughts on repair. Her presentation on her practicum was the inspiration to this talk. So I want to take a moment to read our description for tonight's talk. I know I'm doing a lot of talking, but I'm going to turn it over in a few minutes to everybody else. But I want to take a moment to read the talk, the description for tonight's talk as we prepare for the conversation. So at every turn, we're faced with choices to repair or discard and replace as we consider a broken toy, blanket, coat, or pair of boots. We're challenging the values of repair or lack thereof that have been gifted to us by our past generations. In our physical world, repair has been pushed to the margins, occurring in the dark of night, in the maintenance hours by those made invisible. As bridges collapse around us, as school buildings deteriorate, as our relationships, our bodies, our minds, and our spirits break down, we wonder why self-care and healing is so hard. To center repair of the physical objects we use daily, we must first create them to be fixed when broken, to accept the love and care of repair that is needed for them to withstand. What does centering care of repair and the repair of care look like in our homes, our communities, and our society? Can centering repair in our physical world lead to creating the time and space and tools to repair other parts of our society? That was a lot, but I love that description of the conversation and what we're kind of thinking about tonight. With that in our minds, I'd like to do a round of intros of our panelists. Starting with Amy Meissner. You're an artist and garment repairer, or textile repairer living in Alaska. Can you take a minute to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Allison. Thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I have lived as an uninvited guest on Dena'ina homeland for 21 years. This is an area that's now called Anchorage in Alaska. And this is part of the circumpolar north, which is a fragile environment that I feel privileged to raise 2 children in. My studio practice combines traditional handwork, found objects, and abandoned textiles to reference the literal, physical, and emotional work of women. And the textiles that I use are quite elderly and require a lot of care. So I think about care a lot in the work that I do. This kind of repairing and remaking and manipulation of discarded household cloth made by unknown women is this cultural nod to embroidery created by generations of Scandinavian women in my family. And it's also a space to confront societal disregard of women's textile and clothing work, both historic and contemporary. My social practice is place-based and approaches clothing and textile repair for and with others as an act of prolonging care and accompaniment of vulnerable objects in transition. And I think I'll just stop there.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to now turn to Galus Kaitian. I met Galus a couple of years ago. Now as I was looking to repair a well-loved pair of boots, the boots I wear in the wood shop, boots I wear almost every day. And I asked a wonderful milliner, thinking that she would know, because she makes hats, so she'd know someone who could really care for some boots and bring them back to life. So walking into Jimmy's shoe repair, I was instantly grateful for that recommendation. So Galus, can you share a bit about yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Galus Kaitian. I'm the owner of Jimmy's Shoe Repair. I've been repairing shoes for well over 22 years. I've started the shop in Jimmy's Shoe Repair. I learned the trade from my father and eventually took over the shop from him in 2010. And yeah, I'm trying to teach my son now, who's 19, and we'll see where that goes. Still early in stages, so fingers crossed. But yeah, I've been here. I've been in the same store for many years in Central Square, and I'm grateful for it. I've gotten to meet a lot of folks, great people I've met, like Allison and many others. And yeah, just grateful to be here and to have been able to hold this business for all these years.
Thank you so much, Galus. So Seymour, I've gotten to know Seymour over the years because Seymour Beckford has been an upholstery instructor right here in Jamaica Plain at the Elliott School. So I've gotten to know him and his family and see him every summer. So I'm just going to turn it over to Seymour to share a bit about himself.
Good evening, everyone. I'm really delighted to be part of this discussion. My name is Seymour Beckford, and I'm a professional upholsterer who have been in the business now for the past 50 years. I started in Jamaica, and then I came to the United States during the late 60s. I worked in different shops until I started my own upholstery shop, and then I've been doing work for myself as Seymour's Upholstering, and I also instruct at the Elliott School for the past 15 years. And it's been great being an instructor, and I enjoy the craft of upholstering, and for the foreseeable future, I think that's what I'll be doing.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I feel like so honored that all of you have agreed to be in this conversation and just get to know more of your practice and how we can kind of think about the things that you value in your practice and bring that to other aspects of craft. So for many people, it's hard to wrap our heads around what we mean when we say repair. In many homes, repair is not the first response. As a result, it seems like we're losing the knowledge and understanding of exactly what repair is. So I wanted to start with everyone just sharing in their practice, in their profession, what does repair mean? So an example, it's like, what is your goal that you're trying to achieve? And then what are some steps that you take to get there? So an example, and I'm a woodworker. I am not a refinisher of wooden objects, but I might say I'm going to refinish this chair or this table. And so that's my goal. And then I strip all the finish off of that, sand to get out the dents or the scratches, maybe use water or steam to pop out more dents. and then I'm going to prep it and refinish it so that you get a sense of like, what does it actually look like to be with you all in your spaces while you repair. And I'm going to start with Galus.
Very good. So, well, in my business, when somebody brings in something to repair, when I look at the shoe, I assess it, and I'm very honest up front. I've told many people that you shouldn't repair this, as much as I hate to say that, but there are just way too many, I guess, cheaply made, cheap materials that just don't even hold the glue. So it seems like just wouldn't hold. So to me, I look at it and I look at is it not only is it worth it, but can it withstand the repairing, and then obviously you have those great, well-made, good material shoes that are like, oh great, I'm excited to work on these, these will last you 20 years if you take care of them right. You get excited about stuff like that. And I try to just talk to people as much as possible as far as like what I'm gonna do, what my steps are going to be. I try to relay that to the customer as much as possible so they understand also, and not just me. I know what I have to do. It's like no brainer to me at this point. But so yeah, I mean that's like another reason why I kind of changed my shop around, so people could see the repair being done. It's like it was a big thing for me to be able to show the craft.
Yeah. When I walked in, I remember seeing you, I think it was you and your son, and you were like buffing thing. You had like in the wood shop, there's like tools that we use to sharpen tools with, and it's like spinning around, buffing and sanding things. So I think it's really helpful to hear, especially from a cobbler, like someone it's like a dying trade, right? Like getting it has taken me so long to find folks that can actually repair shoes. So I appreciate you like walking through kind of the different categories and the being honest with the customer, because I think it's an important part. Seymour, I'm going to turn to you for a minute to share, like you say reupholstery. I will, because I think that's the business you're in, and then you teach upholstery.
Yes.
And if you can think about that as like bring people in for a quick minute of like, what does that mean to take like an upholstery class?
Okay. Well, first of all, in my craft, repair is interchangeable with the word restoration. So most times, potential client would come in and say, gee, can you repair this chair for me? And actually, what they mean is, could you restore this chair for me to its original quality or value or looks? And so I usually have to actually have a conversation with the client as to what it means when they say repairs. Because for the most part, most clients just see repair as I bring in a tattered chair and I'll get it out looking beautiful. But it's my duty and responsibility to educate, and actually sometimes talking to the client and go into their emotions to find out exactly what they're expecting. Because in my business, a lot of the clients has emotional attachment to their furniture. And so it's something they want to preserve because it's what they had inherited from a family member, or they had it for a long time and the quality is good. And so as far as repair is concerned, it's really restoring for me. Now, teaching upholstery is another aspect that I've gotten into for the past 15 years. And what that looks like to me is the fact that persons are very interested in learning upholstery, and I'm excited in showing them what upholstery is all about. Now, when I'm teaching, I really teach skills, because I'd explain to them, once you know the basic skill, upholstering, reupholstering is an ongoing process, it's an ongoing learning process. There's no such thing as come in to a class and learn upholstering in 10 weeks. So I teach skills that they could always practice those skills. And it's over time that one become a expert or a proficient upholsterer. So teaching for me is actually introducing a person to the craft of reupholstery.
And when you're teaching upholstering,
Mhm.
students are bringing in old chairs. So they, right, they are taking the material off, pulling off, like sometimes I feel like I see like horsehair or something
Yes.
hanging out in their shop, right? So like they're pulling off all kinds of materials, including deteriorated like foam.
Yes. Yes.
And then they're redoing that. And
Right.
when you're redoing that, are you using, you're not using horsehair, you're using
more,
newer
more
versions.
modern material. And one other thing I'd like to point out also, the term upholstering is a very tricky term, because upholstering means, that's what we teach at the Elliott School. We go down to the frame and builds it all up. In the real world, reupholstering means you only do what needs to be done. Just like Galoo's, you analyze a piece and says, well, you know, I don't need to change the cushion. So again, upholstering and reupholstering, most people say upholster, but it's two different terms. So at the Elliott School, we upholster. So we teach you, we'll have you take everything apart to the frame and build from the frame all the way up.
Yeah.
So that's what we introduced to our students.
Yeah, that's really helpful to hear too. And I think that gets to something we're going to talk about in later on about learn in the repair, you learn to create, and you can learn to create and then learn to repair.
Yes.
Amy, I want to turn it to you because I feel like you kind of span a few different professions really, including the repairing of textiles and garments, which I think both Seymour and Galus can relate to in the work that they do. But if you can share a little bit about what does it look like to do what you do?
Yeah, I would say that it looks different every time I look at something new. It doesn't matter how many times I repair garments, and I'm sure that Galus and Seymour can attest to this. It will never be the same. You know, you might use the same techniques, you might approach things in the same manner, but particularly with garments, they're worn in different ways. They're blown out in different ways. They're going to be worn in a specific way again. And so when I work with garments and garment repair, a lot of which is outerwear because of where I live. And those are garments that are expensive. And, when your puppy jumps up and bites a hole in your down jacket, and the fluff is leaking out, so it's very different approach than if it's a leather jacket that's blown out, perforated the side seam or something. These are two really different approaches. And so when I work with, I hate to even call them clients because I do a lot of trading when it comes to repair work. I trade with people for whatever it is in their life that they have devoted time and craft energy towards. So I have traded with a commercial fisherman and received salmon. I've traded with a professional baker and writer who brought, focaccia to my door for repairing something that was important to her. And I think that that kind of repair, while I have done it professionally in the past, turning it into a social practice that sort of exists outside of the culture of, commodification in a traditional capitalist sense is important to me in terms of creating a community and fostering a culture of repair here in this place, which is quite remote and therefore has a long history of repair. There's a bit of a gap right now between the folks that repaired things in the past because they really needed to repair things. They couldn't get whatever it was that they wanted easily. There was a time where You just didn't know if the airplane, the cargo plane was going to show up, or the barge, or whatever it was that was bringing goods from the lower 48 to Alaska. And so now it's a little different. Even in the last 20 years that I've lived here, there's been a shift. It used to be that if you were part of the non-contiguous United States, meaning Alaska and Hawaii, you just couldn't place an order and receive it online. So supplies are flowing in a way that now that they didn't used to. And so what I'm seeing is, people getting away from repairing things. In our conversation before, I shared with all of you that, we're losing shoe repair places. There are communities where there's no shoe repair period at all. That, you can't. So if you don't know how to do it yourself, or you don't know that it can be done, you have to buy new. And so my social practice looks at, teaching people how to repair and putting repair in the center and putting the repairer in the center. So I can really, I'm really excited about Galu's shop. I wish I was closer. I'd probably come and hang out with you.
You can come visit
more a lot.
I think that's, this is going to segue. I'm going to mix up the order of what I was going to ask you all, because I think it segues to another question. And you are welcome to come to Boston. You can stay with me and we'll hang out at Galusa's shop. But I think, this idea that today it feels like it is cheaper to just throw things away and buy them, right? Which I think everyone here has kind of alluded to that or commented on that. And so the question that I have, because I think that's just our reality, I think everybody feels it on a day-to-day basis. But how do we see that shift? I think in our, I don't know if it's a value or an access, right? Like we have access to cheaper things, so it is cheaper to just replace it. But how do we see this influencing our bodies or our homes, even our neighborhoods and larger, like our society? And so I'm really good at asking multiple questions in one. So you got to hold them all and answer them quickly. So as we're, how's that influencing us? What are we losing? So like values, habits, traditions. Are there things that we're gaining in that? Something that like a lot of people, I feel like it's been a goal to have disposable products. And so I'm just going to open that up because I know, Amy, I think you started to talk about that a little bit, but to kind of dive a little bit more into that. Whoever can talk about it.
I'll talk about it a tiny bit because there was something that Seymour said that I actually really connect with, and that is the emotional attachment that people have to objects. In your case, it's furniture, and it might be shoes, it might be pottery, it might be any number of things, and there is a response that we all have when something that we care about is broken. And so often that response is to just throw it away because it's a terrible feeling, and to get rid of something then almost makes that feeling go away. But I really try hard to think about how to impress upon people that I work with, what if the first response is repair? And maybe it's, this cup that breaks and I can glue it back together. But how does that translate into community and into relationships and into, any other thing that is all of a sudden just as disposable as anything else, right? What if our first response to any of these things is to repair? I feel like it's transferable as a concept. Well, I'll see what everybody else has to say.
Well, this is tricky. Okay, so when I think of repair, I a lot of things come to mind, right? Like you're thinking, okay, let's save this item from ending up in a landfill, or let's, maybe this person can afford a new pair of shoes, and this is going to go a long way to be able to just repair it and keep on going for a long time. So there's like so many things that tie into it. Like there's like thoughts that run through your mind, like there's a million reasons why I do, or a thought goes through my head as far as repair is concerned. But I don't know, I guess how much more I have to say on that, to be honest. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. And I don't have much more to say about that.
Well, as far as repair, and the question was about disposable, and there's a saying now that we are living in a disposable society where hey, people just use things and get rid of it and get a new one. But what kind of impact does that have on the human psyche, or how it affects behavior? I think that mindset of disposable in a general sense could be more negative than positive. Now, if I'm going to deal with furniture, it's a little different. But as far as a disposable society, I think we need to learn to recycle, because that would allow us, in other words, a lot of disposable things today only affects the environment, like plastic. I remember when I was a kid, and the milkman would come around with the milk, and he would put his bottles down, and the milk that served the week before, you'd clean that bottle and you'd pick it up. And so you wouldn't have problems of bottles hanging all over the place, because it's recycled and not just disposed of. Today, because technology has brought in plastic, we're having all this problem with disposable stuff. Now, as far as furniture is concerned, in my field, disposable can be good and it can be bad, because today, as far as, like I said, repair and restoration is the same. That could based on economics, whether a person can afford to do a repair, which at times is very costly, wherein you could go to one of these outlets and get a chair for maybe half of what it costs you to repair. And so in that sense, repair is an entity and disposable could be an entity based on economics. But in a general sense, I tend to want to see recycle more than disposable. And that's just my personal thing, because even today's environment, disposable stuff are having an impact on the environment. And so
you're in a profession that focuses on recycling of some form. Like, it's the very time-consuming recycle, or upcycle, or refinishing, repairing of those items. And I'll just say, I asked that question about, like, how does this impact us? And part of it is I have this two kids that I'm raising that are little, and you start to see society reflected in them as they walk around being like, I just want another one. It broke, and then and every time I say, oh, can I fix that? And by the way, I'll say it, and then I feel like I never find time to fix I have like a pile of things to fix. And you realize that once you start to have that habit, then they start to value it differently. And I wonder how much that has to do with, like, how much that influences how they then see relationships and other things in their lives. So it's something that's on my mind that I keep thinking about. That's why I kind of bring that up. But I want to, take a moment and think about how you all got to the work that you do. So I know there's many different avenues for folks. I learned sewing from my mom, and she learned it from her mom. So there's generational, like, passing of the knowledge. There's certificate programs, master's programs, apprenticeship models. And I think that also kind of influences how we see this in our society, repair in our society, maybe not, how we view it, how others view it. So I just want to take a moment to hear from Seymour, starting with Seymour, but everybody, how did you learn the craft that you do?
Well, it's interesting that my mother was a seamstress, and she was always have her own business as a seamstress. She made ladies' clothes. And I think from about 10 years old, I'm the guy that's always with my mom. When she sew, I'm trimming the threads and cleaning up the item and help her press. None of my brothers and sisters were interested in that. And I think that's what opened my creativity. Well, I left school. That's required in Jamaica. You go to school until you're like 15, and the natural transition is to go and learn a trade. And so I started apprenticeship with, the first was in a garage, and so I learned motor car upholstery. I'm actually a general upholsterer. And then I went and do household upholstery. So apprenticeship got me to where I am today. But during that transition to where I am today, because upholstering is a craft that has many different aspects to it. When I came to the United States, I realized there are French design, you have Scandinavian design, you have Italian, so you never stop learning. And I love upholstery, so I'd always read. I have tons of books on upholstery. I remember there was an online course, so I have 2 certificates in upholstery that I took online. And learning is a process that you just keep working on new furniture. And even teaching, I learn. I'm still learning, because when I'm in a class with 8 students with 8 different pieces, I'm working on 8 different pieces. As you know, Alice and I used to teach during the week, the day program, until I retired, and I'm back now. And so, you know, it's a learning process for me. I'd never tell anyone that I completely learn upholstery, because as Amy said, each piece gives you a different exposure, and each upholsterer too does their work differently. It's very rare to upholster. Now the skill is the same, but I may want to turn a pleat sideways. This guy want to turn it front way. That's why I tell my students, I says, look, once you get in my class, I'll teach you the skills, but there's no such thing as doing it the wrong way. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm always growing and I'm always learning. And, you know, that's all my training and my profession evolves.
And you might have mentioned this and I missed it, but you did learn, first learn upholstery by fixing cars, right?
Yeah. So
did you mention that?
Yeah. Oh, yes. And I as a kid in Jamaica want to learn a trade. The first thing you want to do as a male child is to learn auto mechanic, because you want to get a car, an old car, and you fix it up. But unfortunately, when I went to the garage and thought I was going to start pulling engine apart, I got a car seat to take apart. So I did started as a motor car trimmer by doing seats, headlining, door panels, regulator, windscreen. And then I transitioned from that, get fired and I couldn't go home. So I had to find another shop to learn before I go home to my mom and say I got fired. Fired because I was a kid and party too much. On Mondays, I never get to go to work. And the boss saw me when I should have been sick at home, hanging out with my friends. So that was it. But that's part of the learning period, learning experience of life also. It learns me responsibility. So that's how I have become a motor car and a household upholsterer.
I love hearing like the path that you take. And then Galuz, can you share a little bit? Because I remember seeing your Denise told me, oh, you should go to Jimmy Shoe Repair. I looked it up, and then you had that like full page that talked about Jimmy Shoe Repair and how you came into that. And so I also think it's such an interesting story. So if you can share a little bit about how you got your training to repair shoes.
So basically, I learned everything from my father. As a child in Armenia, like being 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, like early on, my father, he was a shoemaker. Actually, there was no such thing, I think, in Armenia to repair. It was just a shoemaker. So he used to make shoes, and part of the process would be like maybe removing the nails to be able to move on to the next. So I would do those little tasks as a kid, and it was a nice little shop like in the back of the house, very nice. And but when we came here to the States, we first lived in Los Angeles, and my father couldn't find a job as a shoemaker. So he kept looking until he found a job as a shoe repair person. Now he never done shoe repair before, but you could see it ties in. If you know how to make shoes, you're pretty well at repairing shoes. So that's what he did. He ended up, becoming a shoe repair person. And then as far as like everything I've learned, it's only been through my father and trial and error. And I mean, but it's always been in my life. Like I said, from 5 years old to when I was in high school, maybe after school, going to watch the shop for 3-4 hours or whatever. Like it's just always been part of me, this business and fixing shoes. So yeah, I just kind of grew up with it. And but I don't have any other. There's no like certificate programs or anything like that. I think unfortunately for shoe repairing, it doesn't exist. So it is all apprenticeship, and yeah, I did all my apprenticeship with my father. So yeah, I guess I was lucky to have him.
Yeah, and can you share a little, because I know you just mentioned like, oh, there's no certificate or kind of official program for learning
Right.
shoe repair. What do you see as the like downside of not having that certificate program? Because I know you mentioned that in the past.
I guess maybe just not in regulation. Like there's a lot of people out there that are, maybe have shoe repair shops or work as shoe repairers, and they don't really know the skill, and they end up doing a botched job. And I feel like that just gives like a bad name to the trade. Like why would I fix my shoes if they're gonna come back worse than ever or whatever. So that's, in that sense, I think it's bad. And also just the fact that it doesn't exist as an option for somebody,
Yeah.
Because it is, I mean, it could be a lucrative business. Yeah, it's a dying trade, but if you're willing to work hard, it can be a lucrative business as well. So I think it should be taught. And I actually think a great place for it to be taught would be in prisons. I would love that. I would love, because I'm a big believer in like prison reforms as well. I think people should be learning while they're in prison, not just, I don't want to know what they're doing. But that's just another thought of mine, as far as, given a certificate program that could be taught at places like prison or vocational schools as a high school choice, or just like any other trade. So I mean,
yeah, that's helpful to hear, and thank you for kind of sharing your thoughts on that. And then Amy, I just want to turn to you and hear more about your path.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this. One of the things that I think was really impressed upon me at an early age, I grew up in a trailer, and so there was a significant amount of maintenance and repair that felt really visual to me, and that was happening kind of all the time. Sort of based on the space that we lived in, that wasn't falling apart or anything, but I think it just needed a little bit more attention than perhaps a regular house might have needed. And my parents were both very hands-on with regards to understanding materials and understanding construction and fabrication. My dad was a water well driller and an expert welder, and built his own tools and repaired his own rigs. And we were often in and out of the shop where they worked with equipment and pipe, and and it's just sort of understanding as a young person what the structure of a water well was, it was just part of our dinner conversation. And my mother was raised by her grandmother on a farm in Sweden. And so she brought a different sensibility to her domestic life when she came to America. So for me as the oldest, she had a little bit more time to spend with me and to teach me how to sew and crochet and embroider at a very early age. I think I was crocheting when I was maybe 4 and embroidering when I was about the same age. And I learned to use a sewing machine by the time I was 8 or 9. My grandmother in Sweden worked in a garment factory as a cutter. And so my mom would make all of our clothing. When I was in high school, and middle school, I started making my own clothes. And then got an internship when I was 17, so I was still in high school, and worked for a mother and a daughter. And this was in Reno. And so we were making casino uniforms and cigarette girl uniforms and costumes for different productions and things. We also made a lot of wedding gowns, and I did a ton of alterations. So I ripped a lot of things apart and put them back together again. And that is how I learned how to repair. When you're 17, 18, 19, 20, even into my 30s, I was still in the garment industry. I spent 12 years primarily making wedding gowns, but I worked in small factories as well. You don't want to call it, nobody wants to call themselves the repair person. Nobody wants to call themselves the alterations person. We're all designers here. We're all pattern makers, or but really, we were all ripping things apart and reconfiguring them all the time. And that's how you stretched things. And that's how you preserved fabric when you could. There's a ton of waste in the garment industry. And that's one of the reasons why I left it, because it just did not align with my values at all. And I ended up getting 2 undergraduate degrees, one in art with an emphasis in drawing, and the other in textiles. It was sort of a survey textiles and merchandising program. I had wanted to go to fashion design school. I wanted to go to Parsons. And my dad, I still remember the day that my dad sat me down and said, there is no way that I can send you to Parsons. You're going to have to get scholarships. You're going to have to go to the local university. That's your path, Later, I ended up getting an MFA in creative writing and with an emphasis in narrative nonfiction. And then just recently, just a year ago, I finished an MA in critical craft studies. And somewhere in there, I had 2 children and had a different career, and then, kind of came back around to working with textiles because it was something that I could do with very small children. And I understood why the women in my family crocheted and embroidered and were seamstresses, because this is the kind of work that you could do in the home. It's the kind of work you can do with very small children, literally at your feet. And it was a lot harder to be a painter for me anyway. With really small children, that was tough for me. So it was not something I could continue, but that's fine. This return to repair is something that started probably in about 2018, 2017. Mm-hmm. And I've been really thinking about it and, actively engaged in it in one way or another since then. Wow. It felt very much like a latent skill that was important to be applying and teaching other people how to apply.
Yeah. And so that's, I really love asking folks how they got to where they are, especially in the craft world and art. And part of it is, we at the Elliott School, we're thinking about it because we work with kids and adults. And so we think about, how do people find their way? How do adults find their way? How do kids find their way? Which are 2 different questions, and sometimes the same one, because they can find it, in that transition from childhood to adulthood. And And so I think there's a couple of questions in here for you all that I'm curious about. And I think you've all kind of started to talk about it of what are the things that institutions, people in power, institutions, museums or municipalities, like what are some things, and maybe it's just the everyday folks that can do to support pathways for folks to explore and find their passion in craft. And I recognize like not everybody succeeds academically. I learned how to hem clothes. I haven't done that since I was younger, but I learned that from my mom. So I think some of what Galus is talking about is, or maybe both, a few of you is like, I think repair is looked down upon because there's not as many degrees behind it. But also there's a need and it's like a dying craft where people just show up and have a shoe repair shop on every corner and your shoes get torn up. So I think there's a need for something. And so I'm a little taking up more time than I need to because it's something like I'm constantly grappling with, but I just want to hear if y'all have thoughts of like, what can be done? What's your call out for folks?
Well, personally, I think it has been mentioned that repair is a look down on entity, but I think that has been changing because people are finding out, and it comes to disposable, that quality is very important. And most of the times, disposable things are not quality stuff by manufacturing standards. And so, especially in my profession, I find that I'm highly appreciated by someone who knows what good furniture is and what restoring traditional furniture is. Sometimes I feel very, very appreciated by my customers because there are persons out there who have, and again, I'm narrowing it down to my trade. There are persons out there who have sentimental attachment to their furniture. And so I've talked to customers says, gee, I'm trying to find someone to work on my chair for years. When I first came to Boston, I remember we have about 5 or 6 upholstery shops in Boston. I'm probably the only guy that's doing it. And I came out to retirement, opened a studio at home, and my phone is ringing out. I mean, I have a website, seymour'supholstering.com, that I put before and after. I call it my showroom. I get a little modern there too, using virtual technology. But I think that one of the things I'd like to see when I was growing up in Jamaica and when I came here, there was always the trade and the skills in public school, high schools. And as you said, it's not everyone wants a master's degree or a bachelor degree. And they take all that kind of training, home economics, because domestic work was looked down on, only people without education. But now people's realizing a nice home, a well put together home is important. So I think that one of the things that could happen is to put an emphasis on the trades. And once the emphasis on people start learning the trade, I think appreciation will come back because people will then realize there's the outlet to get my shoes fixed and there's the outlet. So I don't see the trades as dying, but I know, to be honest, things have changed because you have mass production. And so you'll always have inexpensive things. But I see the trades are here to stay. I wish I was younger. I see the trades are here. It's something I experience. It's not a trade or getting something repaired, it was always looked upon as the least expensive part. Now it's looked upon as the best quality part. So I'm confident that this thing will rebound, is just to get young people involved.
I love that optimistic view, Seymour. So
You
I
know,
love it. I mean, I'm optimistic too. I shouldn't say a dying craft.
no, and when you
dying,
dying,
but I'm
I say
optimistic.
I use the term dying, but in the sense of just the trajectory of where it's going, but not the real knowledge itself, you know. And once, you know, for instance, example, at the Elliott School where I've been teaching, I wish I would see more young people come in and take my course. It's usually the retiree who comes with a chair, and you'll be so surprised once they get involved. It's like a whole new world. So I think the trades should be back in high school, so students have a choice.
Yeah. Let's let Amy and Galus, you jump in too and share your thoughts on it. Because I mean, I'm like passionate right now hearing Seymour. Do y'all have thoughts to add to it?
Well, definitely, like as far as having the trades in high schools, I mean, that's perfect example of where it should be at a high school. I remember even my high school at a like auto repair shop. And I loved that class. You know, I got my car fixed there all the time for free. It was great. So I mean, just bringing that back and just having that as an option for people, period. You know, I think that's what's missing, you know, like I mean, hey, especially in I feels like prime example, no options, you know. So yeah, I agree 100%. They should be in high schools, they should be in trade schools, they should be in as far as like what could be done, like as far as like somebody, let's say, trying to start a business, it's pretty much impossible these days, right? The cost of rent, the cost of machinery, you name it, right? So it'd be great to have places where they have all the stuff and you can go in, well, like the Elliott School, if you're doing woodwork, you know, it's like if there was places like that where you can go and learn and use their machinery and things like that, you know, that was available with people with no funds, people who could go and use that and, you know, make something out of themselves from that, you know, like a beginning place. So that's what I would love to see, you know.
Yeah, I love that. You know, I have a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old, just turned 16. And you know, they had the privilege of seeing things being repaired at home. And my son last year came to me with, you know, a sock and said, can you show me how to fix this? You know, and he was like 14 or 15, and like, what 14 or 15-year-old else didn't learn how to mend a sock? But he'd always seen me doing it. And so in his mind, he's like, well, that's just something that you do. And I guess, you know, I wish that the repairer was more visible. And it's reaching young people so that they can see it being done, so they know it's a possibility. I'm really excited about a project that I am going to be involved in at a high school next spring. And I was approached by a teacher and you know, came together and we kind of started building this project, which keeps growing. But we'll be working in her classroom with English language learners, many of whom have come to Alaska as refugees or you know, different situations that have a sense of precarity. And we will be working with them on repair, teaching them repair, but also talking about narrative and how repaired objects tell stories about journeys and about people and about places. And then there's another artist coming in who'll be doing a podcast with them around these narratives that these kids are going to be coming up with. And then there's also someone who's going to be working with them with film. And I think it'll be a really exciting project, right? And so I think there's an opportunity for telling histories of place and telling histories of people and what's important to them, what's important enough to take the time to repair. And even if you don't repair it, who can? It's kind of seeking out those people who can repair and have these kind of mentorship opportunities, not unlike the mentorship opportunities that I had when I was a young person. I wouldn't have been able to step into a mentorship at 17, sewing on, industrial sewing machines and cutting people's things apart and remaking them, if I hadn't had that kind of work being done in my home and seeing my mother make our clothing and cut out fabric and understanding, how things are put together in the first place. So I think for me, clothing, teaching people how to repair clothing, it's almost like the gateway. It's accessible. It takes very inexpensive materials. You need a needle and you need some thread. You could do it by hand. Some very basic skills can be applied to a lot of different scenarios. But I think what that does is it opens up the potentiality of objects for prolonging them. Not forever. It's not going to last forever, but it can last a little bit longer. And it can become later, it can become something else. I think about materials that arrives from damaged items that can no longer be worn or no longer have a usefulness in the form that they were in. They now are materials for something else. And I think that's an exciting possibility that it's great to expose young people to.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, for all the different perspectives that y'all have brought, and just recognizing that, I hope organizations like the Elliott School and folks that have platforms, like this is a platform that we have, and this conversation came about to recognize, like, let's bring this to the center a bit more, because we could talk about many things in craft and art, but I think, like, my boots are not always thought to be one of those things. So how do we, like, bring them to the center and have the conversation? So I really appreciate this and you all being part of this. I'm going to bring in our respondent. I was introduced to Sequoia because Amy introduced us after she heard a talk called Maintainer Movement Fellow Event called Who Cares? That's what it was, a Maintainer Movement Fellow Event called Who Cares? And I was so bummed that I wasn't able to listen to it, but excited to have her come and listen to this conversation and just take a couple of minutes to respond. So Sequoia, if you could introduce yourself really briefly, and then just take 5 minutes to respond before we open it up to Q&A.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Allison. And it's really just always a pleasure to hear Seymour and Amy and Galus tell their stories. I am the vice president of a full service interior design firm, and we specialize in something called design equity. We make elevated spaces in the affordable housing sector, which is always very problematic because the majority of our buildings are new construction. And the challenge in this whole sort of larger context of maintenance and repair and craft is that when these buildings are built and when affordable housing is provided, there's a concept that it's sort of it's built until it starts to fall apart. There's no maintenance program for it. And so in listening to this conversation today, it made me think about sort of the act of repair is like this universal cultural connector. And it's really part of our human inheritance, and valuing the knowledge and the discipline and the skill set that's learned and that's acquired in the act of craft and trade is essentially like this antidote and like a true pathway forward to more restorative connections between each other and to the earth. And I, as someone who's Shinnecock, which is an indigenous tribe on the east end of Long Island, and we are on our ancestral lands, I grew up understanding how to make things and how to like repair. And I'm sort of, I don't necessarily identify myself as someone who's a repairer, but I certainly identify myself as a maker. And I find that the Amy had mentioned something that was so beautiful and sad about when something we care about is broken, we throw it away. And there has been sort of a generation of shaming the act of craft and repair. And as Seymour mentioned, that repair is costly now. So these dresses that were made by hand because there was no shop that you could go and afford to buy something, and how we now are sort of in this disposable society where I can easily go buy a new shirt if it gets a stain instead of figuring out like, you know, how to get that out, because most people don't even really understand how to launder their own clothes properly. And that's a sort of maintenance question. Or they can't sort of maybe put a little fun button, sew a little patch, and do a little embroidery to give that life and longevity. And those are small things and acts that like each person can sort of take away. But there's a responsibility that we are mirrors in that act of repair and craft, so that children can see that. Because what was so wonderful about the connectivity of your stories was that each of you watched, you saw it, and then you learned it, you were taught. And that kinetic and sense memory connection that led you to always have that as a skill set. You know, it's a knowledge base that can never be taken away. But it's, you know, essentially free to learn and understand.
Wow. Thank you so much. You really pulled that all together. So I really appreciate your responding
I took
to all
notes.
this being said. I know you did work for that. That's awesome. No, that I really appreciate that. And you brought in some threads that I've been thinking about, of like, how does this show up in our daily lives? Like if we do start to center repair, how does it show up? So I really appreciate you kind of bringing that visual to it. At this point, I'm going to open it up for Q&A. And I know I have a couple of questions that I've seen in the chat and comments that I just want to highlight, and then welcome folks to raise their hand, to ask a question, to add it to the chat. It's, you know, almost 10 after 8 and the conversation wraps up at 8:30. So I want to make sure people who have questions have a chance to ask. One of the questions that I want to say it was Marie, but forgive me because I didn't copy the name. Just wondering if any of you are having difficulty finding materials to use in repair. And I'm not sure if that question, you can feel free, whoever asked it, to clarify if that's like talking in general in the industry, or in this particular time and moment where materials are a conversation of expense and traveling and all the other challenges due to the pandemic and other things. So I'm just gonna, I think it was Marie, yeah, or Mary. So I'm gonna open that up. Any feedback, any thoughts on?
I can speak to that. I'll be really brief. So in Alaska, of course, I'm coming at this from a garment and textile repair point of view. Where I live in Anchorage, we have 2 places to get fabric. Joann Fabrics, which is a big box store, and Walmart. And so when people bring me well, anything, but I'm just thinking most recently of a down coat, full length down coat that I repaired. I had to get really creative and figure out where that fabric was going to come from. And so in that case, I took it from the inside of the sleeve. The lining happened to be the same fabric as the outside. And, pulled it from the garment elsewhere in the garment, and then repaired the outside of the garment. I've also bought other garments at the thrift store, outerwear garments, and cut them apart, salvaged zippers and any sorts of, webbing and linings and all sorts of things. I don't have access to yardage that's like, say, merino wool. I do a lot of repair of base layers and that sort of thing for people, because we wear base layers 10 months out of the year up here. And you can't get that as yardage. And so I'm always, sleuthing out materials in the form of garments. I'm always thinking about what has already landed here in Alaska, so that I am not contributing to the footprint of, yes, I can order things from elsewhere and I can have it shipped here at a cost to me, but at a greater cost as well. So it has been a challenge that I really welcome. Might take a little bit longer, but I will find what I need in the form of something else that can then be repurposed and used as materials, and used until there's nothing left of that garment. I would rather work that way. So I think that's a great question. That's how I approach it.
Yeah. Anyone else have any challenges with materials or?
Yeah, so for me, mostly I would say like the number one thing is like obviously the price has gone up, so the cost of materials has gone up a lot. That's an issue, and it is frustrating when you can't do a job because you can't find a certain sole. So it can be very difficult to get material, especially like modern things, or maybe not even so modern anymore, but like shoes that would have a very specific sole kind of fitted onto it without like a traditional well to midsole, then a full sole. It's just all one piece. So my point is, like, if the uppers of those shoes are great, but the bottoms are completely gone, and you can't get those same factory soles to be able to glue that sole onto it, because you do need a very specific sole to be able to do that. You can't just make one. Well, you could, but it becomes way too expensive and becomes ridiculous, because you have to do it in so many steps to be able to mimic like those one piece kind of soles. So as far as like material goes, it can be challenging that, if you got to look for different places to buy from, then you got to pay separate shipping fees. It does seem like places for me, especially my industry, dyeing trade, like places are closing, like there are less and less places where I can go and buy what I need, my materials. So I'm dependent on like very few places, and if they don't have it, I can't get it. That's what it kind of falls to. So yeah, material can be a problem. Yeah, definitely.
Fortunately for me, material isn't a problem. We have lots of online sources. I mean, I remember I needed horse here, and it came all the way from England by just Googling, and that's it. It shipped UPS. What Galoo said, it may cost a little, but fortunately, again, in my business, when someone have a chair that's 100 years old, they'll pay to get it done. They're not going to throw it in the landfill. And so supplies is a big business to my trade. It's not many, but you can get it online easily. So I don't have any problems in getting materials.
There's a couple of comments in the chat. So if folks that are on the panel haven't looked at it, feel free to, because I think it's really interesting and other folks should definitely read them. I think Jonathan just made a comment, and I'm going to read it. Reestablishing a culture of repair isn't an individual task or responsibility. Community repair is essential. The Elliott School supported us when we started holding Fix-It clinics at the JB branch of the Boston Public Library and lots of other places in the greater Boston area. So that was paused due to COVID, but starting back up. So just recognizing that, like centering repair in our culture and our community requires community support. And I do really appreciate that. And then Mariah says, curious to know if repairing objects has impacted the way you see things, even things outside of your repair practice. I sometimes now find myself being more careful with objects to prevent the need for repair. But I know that I'm also less devastated by some things breaking because I know that I can make a repair.
Well-
Yeah, I can speak to that. I think what I'm certainly engaged in, and I'll just speak to like the core of my family, the way that things are used. There is a habit of close looking that happens. And so often it falls to the person who's doing the laundry, which is most of the time is me, but it's also just an awareness of the way that our garments are being worn, and the time to repair something is actually before there's a hole. And so sometimes you can catch that and sometimes you can't. And so looking at your surroundings and understanding how things are wearing or how they're being worn down, or especially for outdoor gear, backpacks and that sort of thing. If something's starting to fray, then fix it immediately before it blows apart completely. And that is just, that's a habit of close looking. That's coming home from a trip, wiping down all the suitcases, cleaning them, noticing where TSA is like blown a hole straight through it, and repair it, right? Right. If you can, like immediately with some sort of a small patch, instead of waiting until it's
That's a habit.
really blown apart.
That's a habit of close looking and a habit of not procrastinating. I can look all I want, and I look at everything and know what's coming.
Oh, I
and
have,
then
I have a mending pile that is, you know, voluminous over here in the corner that's just tucked
Also,
away.
one
So
of
don't get me wrong.
one other thing I'd like to point out as far as repair is concerned is that certain things are made to be repaired. Because, example, in my trade, if someone buy a sofa, which is realistic, for $4,000, which is a well-built sofa, leather sofa, I'm telling you, after 20 years, they're not going to throw it out. They'll pay $2,000 to fix that sofa. So I personally feel there's a place in society for repair, and there'll always be a place in society. Referring to even those sustainable housing that your company designed. It's designed so that it can be repaired. And so what that does is now create a need for repair. I think that's where it's coming back to, that in the business of repair, a need for repair is coming back. Mass production has kind of put up a shadow on things for a little bit, but people realize those plastic stuff and rubber stuff ain't worth it. Give me that mahogany chair, give me that leather chair, give me that silk shirt, give me that beautiful dress. I'll take it to the seamstress and get that button put on. So personally, I think repair is on an uptick. And another thing with repair, the opportunity for entrepreneurship. In my business, I would love to be able to teach it and send off these kids to start their own business. When I finish, I give you a kit, a basic tack hammer, scissors, some pins, some sewing needle, And I said, do you have space in your basement? Get some business card. The jobs are out there. And you start right there until you grow it as much as you want. I came out of retirement and says, you know what? Actually, I retired to take care of my mom because she was really old and dementive, and I just didn't trust anyone with her. And after she passed away at 99 years and 7 months, I sit and moan for a couple of months, and then he says, you know what? I'm going to clean my basement out and get back to work. And today, people pulling up my driveway as if I have a big business place. So it's just a stigma because mass produce things that was a big crave for a couple of years. You know, I can go down there and get a shirt for $5, and people realize as soon as I wash the shirt, it's faded. You know, so I'm optimistic that it's gonna happen, especially young people. And we just mentioned most young people. It's not everybody want to go to college, but they find that they can open a construction business, a carpentry business, an auto mechanic business. So
you know what you're saying, Seymour, reminded me of I attended the African American Craft Summit put on by the Smithsonian. And I'm not saying the full name, Diana, that's in the audience. But in that conversation, a lot of folks that do quilting, for example, and there was other things like leather products. But the quilting community in particular continues to talk about how there needed to be models for young people to learn the craft because it's really dying. And I don't say that to say that's,
no,
that's like quilt making, a specific kind of category. But it just reminded me of like how severe the need is for these avenues for folks to learn, because you feel like it's a personal craft. It's like part of our lives and who we identify as. And to have that not being passed on into folks that do like repair shoes, for example, they're dwindling or not, right? Like, let's hope there's an uptick. But I think for many folks, they feel like, oh, my craft, I'm not able to pass that on, and not as many people are interested. And Galus, I wanted to give you, or go ahead.
I just wanted to add to that because I think people forget that, like, it's also a way to teach math and science. There's a precision to all of this, right? So like, you can't just, there are like crazy quilts, which are sort of all over the place in terms of pattern and scale, but like, you have to learn how to measure, you have to understand increments and units.
Yes.
So it's a way, it's like also like, again, that skill set, and not just sort of giving like, kids like 4 + 4, like when you actually have the hands working and the mind working all at once, it makes for like smarter people, better learners.
Well, and it also addresses like different people learn in different ways. Like people, some people really learn with their hands, and that's 100%. Yeah, I really like that you brought that up. Somebody talked about policy in the chat, and yeah, right to repair policy is that's a big one. Yeah, absolutely. I think I read, I'm gonna totally misquote, botch this probably, but I want to say it was a Scandinavian country where there are tax credits for, when you go and get things repaired. There's a benefit, there's a financial benefit to doing it, there's an incentive. So
sounds wonderful.
Yeah,
I want that tax credit.
Yeah,
my son's always bringing me like really torn up socks that I'm like, I don't know if that's right.
And we're looking at repair on a first world basis
for holy socks.
because in the third world, repair is a big thing. Yeah, in the first world, yes, people don't repair because you have technology but in a third world country, repair is a big thing. People taking that TV to the repair shop, as right now today in Jamaica. You have guys that repair shoes. So it's really about economics and technology all struggling to find a place in society. And
Yeah.
that's why I think repair is gonna always be around.
We just have a couple more minutes. I know, Galus, I think you were getting ready to say something at some point, and you are welcome to bring it back in if it's still in there, right?
No, I'm not remembering it.
Okay. Well, I do want to take this moment to just thank you all for the conversation. Like, we could keep talking. Like, I feel like I'm in my living room and I need like a glass of wine or coffee or something and just like chatting with you all. But I want to thank you all for the conversation and really opening up to share your journey in the work that you do. And think about it as it impacts our larger context. I think it does. I think it does impact our value system. I think it impacts how we are in our homes with our family, how we are out in our community, how we think about schools and buildings and playgrounds and all the things. So I just want to thank you for kind of pushing yourselves to think about this in a public way so that more of us can engage in this conversation. So I want to thank Iris, and all of our staff who works behind the scenes to make our programming happen. And thank you for all of the folks who attended, who signed up and got all my emails to invite you to the conversation and signed up and joined us. So thank you. Although our programs like these are supported through sponsorship and other funding sources do not cover all of our expenses. So we rely on donations from individuals like all of you in the room. So please do consider donating to support Salon Series in the future, our Career and Pathways program, our adult partnerships and classes that we offer in our schoolhouse, and even our work in our Boston Public Schools. So any donation is helpful, $500 more, $1,200, $25, whatever you can do, we will appreciate. So click on the link and please do donate. If you'd like to learn about upcoming events and programming, you can join our mailing list. You can visit our events page to learn about upcoming programming. Right now, we're doing this amazing concert series. If you're in the Boston area, we're doing an amazing concert series on Sundays at 4 o'clock in our schoolyard in Jamaica Plain. So please do come. They have a long list of performers that are listed on our website, and apparently it's happened. And just to be clear, Jimmy's Shoe Repair is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So you can go there even when you come by and visit. Amy's in Alaska. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I'm going to work on that. And Seymour is in Boston area and teaching at the Elliott School. We also have some repair, recycle, repurpose, reinvent classes that are being still confirmed, but you can look at the details there. So with that said, it is 8:30. I want to say a big thank you to you all again, Seymour, Galus, Amy, Sequoia. Thank you for your time this evening. I think this was a great conversation. And thank you all who participated and listened. And have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was such a
you.
privilege.
Having
Thank
me.
you so much.
This sounds great.
Expensive. That is incredible.
Yeah, one of the
5
things
sessions.
about the course at Elliott School, the other courses define what project you work on, while at the Elliott School, you can bring whatever project you have. You can have your own little chair and bring it in. While the other
Project.
I'm gonna come learn.
yeah, please do. I
Oh,
told you, you know,
100%.
it's
I'm gonna go.
a living trade.